Hi, this ensemble is called Rue Bonaparte. It's named for a famous street in Paris, and it was very famous during the 1860s when this dress would have been worn. It's a beautiful plaid silk dress, extremely full skirt, very typical of that period. This is the period when Worth was designing for Empress Eugénie and using crinoline. And again, this feels very much like Worth to me because it's not overly embellished. It has a lot of ruffles and some embellishments, but they're all out of the same silk. So that's a very sort of classic Worth treatment. This dress was designed by Michael Canadas and team. And it's just a beautiful dress. It's one piece. It actually opens up the front and has these ornamental covered buttons here and self-trim on the bodice. And then when you turn her around, you can see how just beautiful and full and sweeping the skirt is, with this sort of like, I guess a faux knot here, and beautiful black lace and the covered buttons trimming the sleeves. And then to top it all off, she has this wonderful bonnet that was made with one of the Carmel Doll Shop's hat forms, which will be included in the kit. And it comes complete with the dried flowers and the lace and the black velvet trim. And it's just really a delightful ensemble. It looks complex, but it's really not a very hard sew at all. You just need to take some time and be patient with all of these ruffles and gathers and such, but it's really a joy to make. And I would say that as with all of these costumes, once you buy the kit, you can make variations of this costume using, perhaps not as many ruffles or a different type of contrast, or, you can really have fun with it. So I would say get it and have fun with it. And I hope that you enjoy this video, and thank you again. We're starting with the bodice. The bodice is comprised of 3 pieces. The bodice front, so this dress is a little bit different. It's opening in the front, so you'll notice that this is a much wider piece. The back and the sleeve. We're going to set the sleeve aside for now, and we're going to talk about the front and the back. In the instructions, it says specifically to cut 2 mirrored and identical pieces. So I have already cut them out. And when we say mirrored, we just mean that the left piece and the right piece should match exactly. So if you look at this, you can see that the green is here. We've got the band of the, I guess this is like a light brown. And they are as close to one another as I could get them, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be seaming these together. So you want all of your lines to match, and you want them to be as symmetrical as possible. And we've done the same thing with the front piece. Where's the other piece here? There we go. I'll take these pins out. We've done the same thing with the front piece. So you can see, if I'm going to be really critical of this, I don't think these are exactly the same. No, I think that could have been a little bit better. So what I would suggest is you cut one out, then you lay it flipped on the fabric and align it exactly. So what you're also going to be doing is you're going to be cutting 2 backs, 2 fronts, and you're going to be cutting the exact same pattern and the same quantities out of your lining. In this case, it's a tarlatan. And you notice here that there is in the pattern piece, there is a slit here where there's a line. So what I suggest you do is transfer the marking, and that's just my seam marking here. Transfer the marking to your lining side, and then pin the pieces together so they're perfectly aligned. And what I've done is I've overcast around all the edges. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because we just want this not to fray, but also when we are sewing the arms and the sides and the shoulder seams, we want to have pre-overcast that because we're going to just be turning them in, and that they'll already be finished when you do that. So once you've done that, and I've done that with all of these pieces, you're going to cut on the line of the dart. And then what you're going to do, and I say to baste around this, I think you could do that if you want, but what I did was I just took 2 pins before I cut it, just to make sure that nothing was going to shift here, because silk can be a little bit slippery. And I've aligned the cut edges. Now, the way this dart is done is a little bit different than what you might see darts, because it is cut, but I've marked, because I just want a little bit of guidance with a friction, I've marked where that dart can be, and I've started the mark above the cut. So you don't want to be sewing so close to this that when you sew your dart, it's going to open. You want to make sure that you're sewing close to it, but not on top of your cut. So I'm going to do that to, I've already marked these. I'm going to do that to all of these. And I think one of the other things is that this this dress, and I think also with darts and with tarlatan, this dress is probably mid-1860s, or at least the design is mid-1860s, and people were using the sewing machine. It was still, you know, kind of a luxury item, but you'd find clothing that had machine stitching in it, and it probably helped in these days of these huge, massive skirts and decorations. So I'm just going to do that here. Do it on all my pieces. As you say, I've already marked them. So it's going to be approximately a little bit above your cut. And then what I've done is I've measured out 1/4 of an inch away from that cut line. So you're basically getting that line here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to sew these darts, and then I'll come back and I will show you the next step, which is going to be sewing our shoulder seams together and our side seams. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fit this. Once the side has been closed up, the shoulders have been closed up, and we've pressed those open, we're going to fit this to our doll. One other thing I failed to mention was that the back is 2 pieces. So the back is eventually going to be pieced together. There's going to be a center back seam, and when you do that, you really want to try as carefully as possible, and hopefully it'll turn out this way. You're going to want to carefully align your stripes, and we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to come back. The back will be together, our darts will be made, and hopefully our shoulder seams and our side seams will be done, so I can show you how we fit that to the doll. We've sewn the darts. We've pressed them away from the front towards the sides on both the front and the back. We've sewn our back seam. You can see how we're trying as much as possible to align the pattern so it looks really neat. And then we've also, we've sewn it together at the shoulders. We've pressed that seam open, and we've sewn it together at the sides, and we've pressed that seam open. So I'm dressing her over, or actually fitting her over this full slip that there's going to be a kit and a pattern for. And I just want to do that because I want to see how the overlap would be. So if I'm looking at this is going to have buttons that are going to go down it. I kind of like that this falls a little bit past the center opening, and it looks like we have about 1/4 of an inch gap here. Let me gently take this off of her. Okay. So what we're going to do now, and I'm not going to do this on camera because It's just probably going to take a little bit too long, but maybe I could start it. We're going to, and this is, what's great about this fabric is that it's got lines in it, so it makes it very simple for you to find an even edge. We're going to turn this. And also what's great about tarlatan, and I'm sure you all know this, is that it really just, it feels like you're folding paper. It has such a great memory, and it just really folds beautifully, I think. You know, I probably could do a slightly neater job than that, but this is just for our example. And then we just check the fold on this one. You know, it might not be exactly aligned because this is at a slight taper, but we just want this to be as straight as possible in the front because it just looks so much more nice and uniform when you've got something straight and even like that. And I'm going to just, you know, all you have to really do is just finger press it, and you've got this great edge. And I'm doing this quickly. I think you guys will do this much more carefully. Okay, we're going to pin these. You know, and when you're fitting this to your doll, you don't want it to be so snug around the waist that there's no room, you know, really for the skirt. When it's added, it's going to add a little bit of bulk. So I probably would maintain that overlap at, you know, no less than 1/4 of an inch. And I don't have a needle threaded now, but we're going to slip stitch this to only the tarlatan. We don't want to see any of those stitches on the other side. So we're going to slip stitch this close, slip stitch this close, give it another nice press. And then I'm going to show you the sleeve, which is really kind of a fun little design that Michael and the team came up with. Again, we want these to be mirrored. So if you can imagine, let me see, how do I explain this? This is the right side of this fabric, and when it's sewn, it's going to face, they're going to face this way. Oh, probably more like this way. So you can see that these match, these sides match, and this side of the sleeve matches. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our tarlatan and our silk, making sure that we've got a reverse side. We don't want two sleeves that look the same. We want them to be mirrored. And we're going to sew them along the curved edge with, I would say, probably about a 3/16 seam allowance. And then once that's sewn, we're going to clip into the center, making sure that we're not cutting into our stitches. We're going to clip around that curve. We're going to turn it inside out. And again, that's what's so wonderful about tarlatan, is it has this wonderful, you know, crispness to it. We're going to turn that inside out. We're going to make sure that it's really nicely turned out. And then we're going to put our right sides to right sides together on this side seam. We're going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've just actually pinked it, and I've clipped a little bit of the seam allowance away from that so you won't see it. There's going to be lace here and a black velvet trim, but you don't really want to see anything hanging over there. And if you see, you know, if you see that there's a little bit of tarlatan that's sort of like hanging over the edge here, it's fine. You can just trim that off. So, you know, fabric stretches sometimes and it shifts. It's okay. So what we're going to do, and I don't have I should really thread a needle. I have some, but no one's going to see this but me. It's something I used for another project. But we're going to, working within the seam allowance, so within a 1/4 of an inch, we're going to baste the sleeve cap silk and the tarlatan together all the way around. You know, we can always take this basting out because I would not want to see a different color basting if I was commissioning this dress. I'd want to see it to be all uniform, so I probably would use like a cream or something, cream thread. And we're just going to do that all the way around within the seam allowance. Okay, you're going to have to repeat this for the other sleeve, but it's the identical way you're going to be doing it. Okay, I'm just going to trim that. And I love how there's this sort of multi-color thing going on here. I love the transition from this to this to this. I think it's just such a wonderful fabric they found. And then we're going to just very carefully trim off the excess tarlatan. Rid of our little stragglers. And then the sleeves are going to be inset into the arm's eyes. So I just want to make sure what you're going to be doing, and I think you could decide whether or not you want the green to be in front or you want the brown to be in front. And let me look at this for a second. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I kind of like the green. I think it's more unusual. So you're going to find your center of your sleeve, and you're going to align the center of the sleeve. Turn this inside out and just imagine that we've already sewn that together. And you're going to align this. And, you know, sort of set-in sleeves are sometimes a little bit fussy, but I think you've done them all so many times that they probably should not be an issue for you. And you're going to align the side seam. You know, I'm doing this quickly, but you're going to take your time, make sure that you're capturing all of your layers. There you go. Yeah, the sleeve cap is always just a little bit tricky. And you're going to pin this in place. And they make such a beautiful pattern at the Carmel Doll Shop. You know, it always seems to, well, I know it's not magic because a lot of work goes into it, but it always seems to fit so beautifully. Let's see here. Okay. So you're just making sure you're aligning all of your raw edges. Now, and you can see that the pins don't want to stay in place because it's around a curve. See, they all popped out, which is always fun when that happens. So what I would suggest doing at this point, because you want this to be a really beautiful, how would I put this? A really beautiful, unpuckered sleeve cap. If you're not sure about fit, and I'm not going to use this thread again, but I would just baste within the seam allowance around the armhole, you know, capturing the sleeve, the lining, the bodice silk, and the bodice lining all together, and just turn it inside out and take a look at it and see what you think about it, because this is not going to tell you anything because you're using pins and they're going to be kind of jagged. So, you know, actually, I don't mind the brown. I could actually also move this onto the other side and see what I think about the green. Let me think for a second. Yeah, I kind of like that, the green on the back, because it's sort of blending into the green here, and this is blending into this, even though it might be nice to have a contrast. So once you've got the fit, and you could try it on your, baste it, try it on your doll, see how it looks. You're going to, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and let me just make sure that I get all this very nicely done here. With a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to sew this together, and you're going to sew it with a small running back stitch. So, you know, maybe like I would probably do this with a A running back stitch, I think, is a couple of stitches, then a back stitch. I would probably do this with an entire back stitch just for strength, and it also creates a really nice, tight and durable seam. And really the goal is you don't want to see any puckers here. You want this to be completely smooth. So hopefully when I do it, it will look completely smooth. If you need to, you can always, once you've sewn it, you can always take some small clips, make sure you're not going into your stitching, and that will help ease it a little bit. And then what I would do is I would overcast all of it. You could probably even trim it a little bit, but I don't think it really needs to be trimmed because she doesn't really have a very, you know, I would want to say fat, but very full arm, upper arm. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn these back and slip stitch them in place. We're going to finish our other sleeve. We're going to set that in, and then we're going to sew these together. And I will be back to show you the next step, which is really kind of interesting. It's going to be a bodice embellishment, which is going to be gathered. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. It's going to be gathered, and it's going to go over the shoulder, and it's going to dye into the waist, and then we're going to baste that in. But I'll show you what we're talking about when we get there. Very, very simple and very effective design. So the sleeves have been set in. We've set the sleeves in. And, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. If I was to do this again, I may just run a slight easing stitch around the top of that sleeve cap because I got a few little puckers and I'm not really happy with them. It should really be smooth. And if you run that easing stitch around and you pull it up very slightly, not to make gathers, it should be perfectly fine. So that would be my recommendation to you. We have also turned in the neckline. I would say, if I have a ruler here, I had one here earlier, but not sure where it's gone to. This would be approximately, I would say, 1/8 to 3/16 of a turn under, and we've slip stitched it, and we've just given it a press because in a later step we're going to be running a black velvet ribbon trim around here and adding some lace. So I've actually moved on to the bodice decoration, and I just want to take you through that. If I can find the bodice decoration that I cut. Where are you? Okay, here we go. So these are going to be identical. And the other one that I cut was the identical pattern placement to this one. So what you're going to do is you're going to turn your pieces in so there's an overlap at the center. You can make this a little bit wider if you want. If you want to see some green on the edge, that might be pretty. But then you're going to give it a nice press. So that's basically your strip that you're going to be working with. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find the center of that strip. And that center is going to be gathered across. You might want to use a thread that matches whatever stripe you're running across. You're going to gather that up tightly, and you're going to align that with that gathering line with the shoulder seam. So then what we've done, and I think it's a little bit, I think in my instructions, or in the instructions, I mentioned that you gather the end of this. I think that it probably would be better for you to gather this, pin it in place, and then just estimate how you're going to have some extra here. Just estimate how long that's going to be, and then sew either directly a little bit below it or a tiny little bit above it, because this is all going to be captured in the weight and the skirt seam where the waist is going to meet the bodice of the skirt when we get to that point. So you're going to be doing this on the front and the back. And I've made it a little bit tighter in the front and a little bit wider in the back. You know, you can arrange it however you want to. I might even, like, if I was going to do this again, I might even just sort of distribute my gathers and maybe press it or steam it. So you're going to set those folds the way that you want them to be before you actually sew it down. So the next step that you're going to do is you're going to sew across this with little tiny stitches that try to make them as invisible as possible or small as possible to the shoulder. And then you're going to sew across here with just like a basting stitch. You don't even have to trim this off because you're going to trim it off at a later step. You're going to do that on the front and the back. Notice on the front how it's spaced slightly away. And I wish, there's a ruler. Just when you think you're not going to find one. This is about an inch away from the folded front of the bodice. And this one's actually kind of much closer to the center. And I would say that's probably about, I don't know, about a quarter of an inch away from that center seam. So it's really meant to be more like a V shape in the back, and it's meant to be a little straighter in the front. And you can see it sort of covers the sleeve cap a little bit. It's very pretty. So I'm going to do that, but I want to actually move on and talk to you about the skirt, because that's the next thing we're going to be doing. And I don't know if the camera's going to be able to catch all of this. Maybe I can just move it up a little bit. Let's see how far we can go. There's a lot of pieces to the skirt. If you've done the full slip, it's pretty much the same shape. The full slip is a little smaller. You're going to be piecing your pattern together before you cut your fabric. And you can see here there's letters that tell you which sides to join. They're not going to match up exactly in the center because we're just trying to get these as large as possible on 8.5 by 11 paper. But you're going to be cutting this out of silk and out of tarlatan on this fold. And you're also going to be marking on your silk and on your tarlatan this dot. Because what we're basically going to do now, and let me just see if I can move her out of the way. You're going to be sewing those two pieces. Like it's a very wide skirt. I actually really love the shape of the skirt. It has like a little demi-train, or at least more fullness towards the back, which is really beautiful. You can always iron out whatever you need to. We're going to be matching the raw edges on the sides and at the bottom, and we're going to be sewing that together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do that. I'm going to probably step away and get that sewn up and show you the next step. But what you're basically doing is you're creating a lined skirt, and you're lining it with the tarlatan, and it's going to give it this beautiful body, and sort of fullness, and really help it to keep its shape. This is my tarlatan. I think that the tarlatan that will come in the kit might be a little lighter. This is actually kind of a medium weight tarlatan, but it's just really I love working with it. Like we said with the bodice, it just really helps to maintain shape, and it's very, very nice to work with. So I'm just going to continue to pin that across, aligning as close as possible these raw edges and these side raw edges. And I'm going to sew it across the bottom. And then once I've sewn it across the bottom, we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to trim maybe about 1/8 away from that, 3/16 away from that seam line. And I'm going to then open it up and press it. And I'll show you the next step after that. I probably should have had a couple of skirts in different stages to make this a little bit faster in terms of the video, but I didn't have enough fabric. But I think that you understand what we're doing. We're creating the self-lining for this skirt. So I will go off, I will sew that together, I will come back, and I will show you the next step. So the skirt's been sewn together, tarlatan and the silk, across the bottom, straight edge. And then that seam has been trimmed about a 3/16 or 1/8 inch away from the seam, from the actual stitching line. And then we've opened it up and we've pressed it. We've pressed the seam allowance of the tarlatan towards the silk, because we don't really want to see that once we're doing this next step. And the next step is that we're going to fold this up so a small bit of the silk actually shows from the inside. And I think, you know, this is probably about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit under 1/4 of an inch. You just don't really want to see that tarlatan from the reverse side of the skirt. So that's the reason why we do that. Now, you're going to notice when you do this that because you're sort of offsetting the silk and the tarlatan, you're going to have a little bit of silk left over up here. Don't worry about that. It's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, it's going to be much better because in one of our next steps after we've actually sewn the side seam is that we're going to very carefully smooth this out, pin it, and then we're going to stitch like maybe 3/16 inch away from the cut edge, and then we're going to trim the rest of that tarlatan off because we don't need it. So what we're going to do now, let me just get rid of some of these little, where we go here. That's the thing with silk, it's like pulls easily and it flies all over the place. So what we're going to do now, it may seem a little bit odd, but we're going to move right sides to right sides, and we're going to align, we're going to open this up. This is sort of like you do a lined sleeve, which I think we had looked at when we had done the sleeves. You're going to pin these together, align your raw edges and pin them together. Now, one thing I didn't show you is that, do you remember on the pattern there was that little dot below the waistline? I've just clipped that out on one side of the skirt. You don't need to do it on both sides because you're piecing these together and it should work really nicely. One thing you do want to do, which I think is important, is you want to try to align your pattern as closely as possible. And the wonderful thing about this plaid silk is that the lines make it so easy to cut and to iron, rather to press. So you're going to do your best to try to align these. And I think it's probably fairly good. I don't know what it's going to look like at that center. I suppose if you were really fanatical about it, you could figure out how to sew it in such a way where you'd sew between these lines or on top of the lines, or you know, like they used to do with all that fussy cutting. But we're also marking, we have our little notch here. We're going to stop our stitching here. So what we're basically going to do, and I'll pin this together so this will make more sense. We're going to sew the seam together. Now, this is a little bit different because this is the center front of your skirt. And this seam, the bodice opening is going to align with the opening of the skirt. And the, what was I trying to say? So it's a little bit different because generally you see the skirt opening in the back, but in this case, it's opening in the front, and you'll see how that works. So I'm going to go and I'm going to sew this together. Then I'm going to press the seam allowance open all the way from the top cut edge of the tarlatan all the way to the top cut edge of the silk, and I'll show you why we're doing that when I come back. So once you've stitched that together and you've pressed your seam allowances all the way to the top on both the silk and the tarlatan, you've got this really nice, it kind of reminds me of a lampshade a little bit. It's got these creases in it. Don't worry about that. We're going to be giving this a press a couple of times. You know, done our best. I think probably I could have done a much better job aligning that. But I will say that there are going to be 3 rows of ruffles that are going to come over the skirt. So a lot of this is going to be hidden, which is unfortunate, but the ruffles have the same fabric, so it's just as pretty. And then you're going to basically slip stitch. I haven't done that yet. You're going to slip stitch your silk to your tarlatan. Just make sure you don't see any stitches on the outside. So I might actually want to just adjust this a little bit more, so a little bit more of the silk hangs over the tarlatan. And then you've got this self-enclosed, or rather self-lined skirt. So then we're going to, again, run a line of stitching, probably about 1/8 of an inch away, and we're going to trim all of that extra tarlatan away because we don't need it. The next thing we're going to do, and I'm just taking you through a couple of steps now, is when we apply the ruffles, I think you probably all have a different way of doing ruffles. One way that a teacher taught me, and I think it's a really good way of doing it, is you want to quarter your skirt. And by quartering your skirt, you're going to have, let me get my pins. This is your center, right, your center seam. And you're going to find your center back. So all you're really doing is just opening it up, moving it around so you find these sort of landmarks. And then you're going to match the front center to the back center, and you're going to find the sides. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because what we're going to do next is we're going to run a line of basting. It'll also help the layers of the skirt to lie together when they're stitched and when they're worked with, because as you can see, just by like merely handling this, it gets a crease in it, which is fine, you know. Actually, it might help you to sew the straight line, but I don't have a very long piece of thread here, and I probably want to use a contrasting thread, so I'm going to look for some white thread here. Just have a big spool of thread I use for basting because I don't want to use the good stuff. And we're going to thread our needle. And you don't have to knot it. And what we're going to do now is we already know that this is our center seam, so you don't have to baste that. But we're going to, it doesn't have to be, you know, exact. You're going to find that line that is your side of the skirt, and you are going to run. Again, you know, you're going to probably get this a little crumpled, but you can iron it out, so don't be worried about that. Tarlatan has a wonderful memory. You're just basting a line up here. The reason why we're basting the line is that when we are working with our ruffles, because it's about, I think, 95 inches of fabric that you're going to be ruffling up, you're going to want to do the same thing with your ruffle. And when we get there, I will show you that step, but you just are looking to sort of create a visual line for yourself. So when you're ruffling, you're going to align the quarters of your ruffle to the quarters of your skirt, and it's going to help you to have a really beautiful, evenly spaced ruffle. Instead of, it happens to me all the time, you get to the end of the ruffle and you run out of ruffle. Or rather, it's not wide enough for the skirt. This is going to help you really distribute the ruffles beautifully along the skirt, so the gathers are all very nice. So I've done one side. You know, you could even use like red or something if you wanted to really make it stand out, because you're going to pull these stitches out. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm not going to take your time up by doing this, but I'm going to go away and I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to sew along the top. I'm going to trim off the tarlatan. I may or may not have slip stitched this, but I'm going to sew the side of the sides, as we said, and I'm going to sew the back and in our quarters in terms of basting them. And then I'm going to come back and show you how we start to work with the ruffles, because you're going to apply the ruffles before the skirt is gathered. It would just be a nightmare to have to try to figure out how to distribute ruffles on a gathered skirt. It's much easier. You know, this includes if you're doing decoration on a skirt, it's just much, much easier to do it when it's flat, sometimes even when it's not even sewn together, because you just have this beautiful flat surface to work with. I'm sure all of you guys know that. There are no novices here, I think, in sewing, but if you are, it's a really good, it's a good trick. So I will continue doing this. I will come back and show you the steps with the ruffles. We've slip stitched our front opening closed. I'm going to show you something. This isn't what you don't want. You don't want to see these stitches. I would normally go in there and pull those out, but I just want to get this video out for you. And I can probably see a little bit, some of them up here too. I mean, I'm using a thread which hopefully is not going to be too apparent when it's used, but you know, I do like to try to make things as perfect as possible. And you know, one thing I said earlier, I think in the last segment, was that I said something about novices. And I just wanted to say, I was thinking about that. And I think, and I really believe this, I think anybody can sew, as long as you know how to sew a straight line and you can practice and practice and practice. As long as you know how to sew a straight line, and by hand or by machine, and you just keep practicing, because every time you make something, you're going to learn something and it's going to get better and better. You know, I just don't want anyone to feel bad. I remember when I was first starting, and when I look at some of the things that I've made in the past, I'm like, oh, this is horrible, you know, and that you just keep learning. And it's actually really fun to keep learning and keep sort of honing your craft. So I'm going to show you, the silk is just really loves to fray. I'm going to show you how simple it is to make one of these ruffles. So you're going to have in your pattern, I believe it's 5 inches, I think. Yeah, it's a 5-inch, I believe it's about 5 inches wide, and it's going to be 95 inches long. And the thing about the fabric is you're not going to be able to get identical ruffles, meaning you're not going to get the same placement on every one of them, because you're only going to get a certain amount of fabric. If you can figure out a way of doing it, that's great. You should do it. But I wasn't able to figure out how to get an even, you know, a repeat of these ruffles. And I think that's okay, because there's something really charming about this. You know, some things sort of blend into each other. And so the ruffles are all going to be a little different. And what I would say is, before you start this, you just might want to prepare all of your ruffles. And I don't mean gather them. I just mean prepare them by folding in and pressing in your 1/4-inch seam allowance on the top and the bottom. And this might be a little bit more than a quarter, but I'm trying to align it to the pattern. It's a little bit more. It's more like 3/8. It's okay. As long as they are actually always the same height, that's the important thing. So when I pressed it, I just used the pattern as a pressing guide, and that's why I think this fabric is so wonderful. And then what we're going to do, just imagine that we've done all of our ruffles, or at least cut them out, press them. We know which one we're going to start with. We're going to determine what we want to be the outside of the ruffle and what we want to be the inside of the ruffle. And I apologize. Once you've pressed in the seam allowance on the long raw edges, you're going to fold them together and press them. Fold them together so they meet at the very top, and you're going to press them at the bottom. So you're going to have this sort of double layer ruffle, which gives it a really beautiful body. So just like we we were talking about with the skirt, we are going to find, if I can do it on camera because this thing is so wide. There we go. Where are you? Okay. We're going to find the approximate center of this. And we should really baste it with a bright colored thread, because once you get going and you're gathering, these pins can fall out, and then it's not fun for anybody trying to find where you were. And then we're going to find the center of that piece, and I'm just going to finger press it a little bit. And that's the line. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find the center on the other side. Just give this a little finger press. Okay. So now we determine what the front of your ruffle will be. And I like this. I think that's really charming to have this contrast. And the second ruffle is probably going to be a little different, and that's perfectly fine. So what you're going to do, and this is where the sort of trick comes in, is you're going to start, I would probably start, I don't know, maybe like a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. You're going to anchor that in. And then you don't have to pin this, you're just holding it together. You're going to take some gathering stitches here. And I'm just going to show you a couple of them. And it's fairly close to the top of your edge. And what you're basically doing is you're capturing both layers and folds into one. Now, the reason why we've done this rigmarole with these with our basting and with our quartering is that we're just going to continue to gather this up, but we only are really at this point, we're not going to gather the entire length. We're just going to gather it so we make sure that we've got enough and some beautifully distributed gathers. And you know, this stuff takes time. You could probably do this by machine too. I just like the hand gather. It's probably going to take me forever to do it. So I'm just going to show you then what we're doing. We're not sewing anything down yet, okay? Because you might want to give this a little press. So what we're doing, and this is the side of the piece. This is your center back. This is one of your center sides. So, you know, I don't normally like to, how do I put this? Always see a seam in the same place. So like, you know, you might see the seam always fall on the center back, but I think it's good to stagger them a little bit. So this one I'm going to do on the side, maybe another one I'll do on the other side. And the idea here is that we're gathering this up just this length from our start to this to fit within this area. So it's going to be a really beautiful full gather. Let's just make sure that none of my pins have fallen out. This thing is just such a big ruffle. So you're just going to continue doing that. And, you know, you're not going to tie it off or anything. You're just going to be sort of like checking it against, obviously, if we're going to have a seam here, we need to have a little bit that we're going to be able to sew together, but you're just going to keep checking against your measurements. So you're going to have these very full ruffles. And when you're done, what you're going to do is you're going to sew them together. Seam them here, and you're going to probably pink that and press it open. But by using this technique, you should have a really beautifully spaced and gathered ruffle, very equally gathered on all sides of the skirt. So I'm going to keep doing this. We could probably do this until the cows come home, but I'm going to keep doing this. I'm probably going to do the other two ruffles, and I think then there's going to be a fourth ruffle that's going to be treated a little bit differently, and I'll show you that in one of our next steps. But I'm going to continue with this, and then I'm going to come back and show you probably all three ruffles done, and then I'll show you how we're going to apply the fourth ruffle, which I said is a little bit different than the first three tiers. So you can see that that's really giving you some beautiful fullness here. And, you might even, once you've got the length that you like, you might want to, I think really this will happen after you've sewn it in position. When you've sewn it and you've distributed your gathers, you could sort of use your pressing board and steam those ruffles in position. I don't mean, if it was me, I probably would press them flat, but by hovering steam over them and arranging them on your pressing board with pins, you can sort of create give them some memory, and they're always going to stay in that arrangement. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I will come back and show you the three ruffles in place, and then we'll talk about how to treat the fourth ruffle, and then we'll talk about how to gather up the skirt. And I think I did mention to you that we did we stitched very close to our edge here. We trimmed off the extra tarlatan because you won't need it. And our last step is going to be gathering the top of the skirt to fit the bottom of the bodice. And I will be back.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button.